Now, our general aim is to look at the cultural determinants and the universality of virtue in general. Also this theme of syncretism. So although we originally thought of this as a sort of contrast between age, nation, faith, but really actually makes much more sense to think of them as a sort of blending, on particular occasions, as was just said by Peggy. And also determine whether our wisest participants, as assessed by Monica Ardelt's sort of 3D wisdom scale, whether they differ in the way they consider the exemplars of moral virtue. So we've got a very broad, this is a really sort of conceptual model that we're still tinkering with, but in essence we're trying to think of various things that might motivate you, various aspects of the self that we're considering, and how this all in the end will play out in terms of quality of life. And we've done this in two ways. We did a sort of set of self-report questionnaires and surveys, and then we also did in-depth interviews. So for the self-report questionnaires, I'm actually going to hand it over to Hyeyoung, and then I'm going to come back and talk about just what some of the, the interviews had to say about exemplars in our extreme case sample, looking at the high and low scores on the Ardelt scale. So I'll just hand it to Hyeyoung for now. Did you want to come up?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right? So we've been collecting data. It is still collecting. Korean data is all collected. Canadian data, we still try to find more people in Muslim population. Okay, okay. So these are the participants we have been trying to find, and most of them we found, but Muslim data we are still trying to find. It was hard to find Muslim data, especially in Korea. So Muslim population in Korean site are actually foreigners who are working in Korea. We just couldn't find it, especially the age group we wanted to find, we just couldn't find. And then. So that the Muslim population data was not included in the analysis we are showing you today. But we have 85 Koreans, 94 Canadian, and 95 young population, which aged from 18 to 25, and older population who are between 60 to 80. Sometimes there are a few cases who are over 80. Okay. Education, we try to group these people. We have actually 6 people who have no formal education at all. They are all Koreans, and we have a 31 population who got education up to high school, and 122 people who completed some sort of a college education, and 20 postgraduate, people who have a doctoral degree, master's degree, and some other, associate degrees. We also have look at the 4 different religions. Christianity, I know, some of you already know about our studies, so I don't want to go into that, but anyway, we have a Christian group, Buddhist group, and atheist or agnostic group. Sometimes it's hard to judge, who are atheist or, agnostic. Anyhow, so as I said, 91% completed first, study 1. In study 1, we have 2 different, data collection stage. The first one was the interview and survey. We have a lot of surveys. So it was 1.5 hours survey plus interview session, and then in phase 2, we have simulation, computer simulation. They are people, 2 people, in each group are actually playing a game, which is very similar to the one you showed you. Which one was it?
It was Blaine.
Right. Yes. So what they are doing. Game. Yeah. So what they are doing is they are playing this. Each of them become a leader of a nation, and they try to make decision on how much plant they can buy, and etc. etc. So they're not necessarily try to gain their property for their countries, but they try to play to see if we are not exhausting their resources and etc. At the same time, how much they could actually make their people in their nations happy, right? So anyhow, those kind of games we have the data collected, but we have not have not had the result yet. So anyhow, it's still coming. We're trying to show today. What we're showing you is quantitative data we have found. And hold on a sec. Can you give me my glasses? I think it's good to see. Yeah, I'm getting old and my eyes are not good anymore. So it's probably better if I can see you. Thank you. So where were you? Okay, so there was for second page, we have our participants to do computer simulation, and then after that, we also have additional interviews about what make our what was your intention when you are playing the game and etc. So there's some other further questions too. All right. Okay. Oh, okay. This is a part I should. Anyway, in the question for quantitative survey part, we use a lot of questionnaires about virtues and values and spirituality and religiosity, that type of stuff. So some of them we use is wisdom scale adults. Wisdom is basically wisdom is more complex human, virtues and values. I mean, it include a lot of virtues, which we regard as a high human achievement. So we try to see how wisdom works in this case. Anyhow, and then we also have a self-control scale and 15 core value scales, and we also threw in the quality of life, to see how happy. I mean, not only just happy, how satisfied they are in their life and etc. Okay, so, and then the wisdom performance task was the one, the computer simulation. We also wanted to look at wisdom in action, not just what they say, about who they are. So, okay. So for interview 1. Ask about the personal understanding of virtue, and and they're also supposed to nominate, provide some examples of virtuous, morally, a virtuous person, morally high or wise person, but at the same time they also talk about their own morals and virtuous, life and etc. Okay. Interview 2, I explained before, so I'm just gonna skip that. All right. So last year, I just did a correlation analysis. I showed you just because we just didn't have enough data. But this year, I was supposed to do measurement invariance test because we are doing. I think we are the only group in here doing the cross-cultural study. So when you're doing cross-cultural study, we need to see what you are measuring is really, I mean, if everybody, Korean or Canadian, have the same understanding when you read an item, right? But I didn't have a chance to do it because I wanted to complete the data collection first before I run it. So, but I just wanted to give you some big picture about how let me go back. What kind of relationship we have in this big picture, conceptual framework we have. Okay. So I just first, I have 3 different data analysis here. I just looked at the MANOVA because we have several independent variables and several dependent variable. I also look at the canonical, correlation analysis because it was canonical correlation analysis is a good way to look at set of data, how these two linear set of data are, related to each other. So I did that, and then the last thing I did was a regression analysis using quality of life, which we threw in, and also we wanted to also use core values, how other variable we threw in are related to core value. So the first thing is a MONOVA. It shows that there's a significant a statistical significance among the variable. We take a look at it, and the green parts are green variable. The variable where I highlighted green with the green are those are more univariable, which is more significant. Okay, all right. So you can see there's the effect size was also good, and I'm gonna go into more detail about so then where this mean difference is coming from, right? So all the religion, nation, age group, and also education, all of those, 4 different, the contexts were statistically significant, but we wanted to go in depth about where these differences is coming from. So if you look at religion, so quality of life was definitely, was also had a significant differences between different religion, Christianity and Buddhism and atheism. So like if you look at those, the Buddhism somehow have the highest quality of life, and the Christianity next, and atheists are the last. The reason I didn't highlight it with red is although it was significant in MANOVA, when you look at the mean difference, and I did took a test, it wasn't, the difference wasn't that significant. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay, and then CRS is a religiosity test scale. So, Christian definitely have the highest, and this is a significant highest, and then Buddhist, and then atheist, which we could imagine. And also SCS is a self-control scale, and interdependence has a significant differences among different religious groups, and the Buddhism, the Christianity has the highest highest the interdependence somehow, but it wasn't really significant compared to Buddhist or atheist, but definitely there is a big difference between Buddhist and atheist group, okay? And also DSES is a daily spiritual experience scale, but that one somehow turned out to be significant. So the Christianity, has the highest, and so forth. Okay, and then we go look at the Korean and Canadian, the nation. What's how this nation culture make difference in the virtue scales, right? Self-enhancement was Korean scored higher on self-enhancement compared to Canadian, and interestingly, the wisdom scored either Canadian scored higher in wisdom, and Korean scored lower in wisdom. Okay, but it might be also impacted on the self-face. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Oh, anyway, I'll talk about it a little bit more in depth later. And quality of life, Canadian has higher quality of life. Interdependence, is it interdependence or? Yeah. Yeah. Independence scale, Korean has higher somehow, and Canadian has lower. Okay, daily spiritual experience, Canadian has a higher score. Okay, all right. And then if you look at the age and education main effect, you know, conservation, this is a virtue orientation. So conservation, older people have a higher conservation than younger people, which we could somehow, predict. And older people have a higher core scores than younger people, and quality of, older people also have a higher quality of life than younger people, and older people also have a higher interdependence than younger people, and older people also have a higher the daily spiritual experience than younger people. Okay, and also and the education only affect on wisdom scale, not anything else. So that's a very interesting thing. But this is a powerful difference. So the more the more you educated you are, the higher wisdom score you have. So that's the mean difference we got so far. And I look at the canonical correlation analysis to see how these are related, right? How these variables, the virtue variables and the nation, I'm sorry, that's not education, sorry about that. So the other, environmental or, other, the nation and culture, age, and education level and religion are also related to the virtue scales. And so what we found was nation and education is highly correlated with the wisdom, negatively related self-enhancement. Those are more, significant difference. And then that's the first and foremost effect you can find. And once you remove that effect, then you'll see how age is related to how age matters to other type of virtues like conservation and core values, which I showed you in the mean differences. When we look at, let me go back to here. So when we look at this, age differences, there's a huge difference between older, younger group in terms of different kind of virtue. And normally it was older population has a higher, higher score on different types of virtue, plus quality of life, and etc. So that's just give us some pictures of how these things are related. And then I look at the quality of life as a kind of, it's not necessarily outcome measure, but we want to see if you have a higher virtue, are you gonna be also happy in life, right? So one thing interesting is wisdom is the strongest, not actually strongest, wisdom and the independent self-control are correlated, are predicting the quality of life, but independence is actually negatively predicting the quality of life, while wisdom is positively predicting the quality of life. Okay, if you look at the next item, so I wanted to look at the core values. I mean, there are so many other things I could analyze, but anyhow, so I wanted to look at how these virtues, variables are predicting core value, the 15 core values. So most of this PVQ5 is actually virtue orientation. So the first one is self-transcendence and conservation and self-enhancement and open to change. So those are all predicting core values. So if they have a higher score on this, they are more likely higher score on core values too. Same with the wisdom. But independence somehow, if you have too much independence, it really doesn't predict your core values. So that was very interesting. Interdependence somehow doesn't affect anything to quality of life or core values, but but somehow independence is a strong, factor that predict negatively on either quality of life or core values. So that's a very interesting thing found. So, but we only look at, we have so many variables here, but even in this variable, we can go in more depth. For example, like we have 15 core values. Some of them are very important to look at it separately. You know what I mean? Like humility is one of the one. What else we have? Help me out.
Yeah. We have, I think there's love, there's wisdom is itself sort of just as identified as a value.
Right.
A variety of.
Yeah, so so we can also look at the individual of all those core values as a virtue. So what I'm saying is that like we could go more in depth about looking at all different subscales. Even the wisdom scales, we have three subscales, which is a first one is cognitive and reflective, because reflective wisdom is reflective part is very important in other virtue development too. So anyhow, and then also there's affective, like empathy, empathy and so pro-social behavior and etc. too. So that's so far what we have for qualitative analysis. I'm gonna come back in study 2, but some of this quantitative analysis is actually somehow we can also use it in qualitative. You can also see it in qualitative analysis too. Okay. Over to you.
Okay. All right, well, thanks, Hyeyoung. As you can see, it's actually we have a lot of material. Let's say the message is not 100% clear, even to me, as to what we're supposed to draw from this. But we do see that there are differences between the countries. I'm actually going to zoom in now on a much sort of finer grain, and we're going to look at a more qualitative analysis of exemplars who are nominated. And in particular, extreme cases that in terms of their scores on the 3DWS. Like, so people who score the highest and lowest in, say in their answers to this wisdom scale developed by Monica Ardelt, and see how their discussion of exemplars differs. Now, our general theoretical framework we're drawing on exemplars moral theory from Linda Zagzebski, also person perception prototype theory, and just a general philosophical anthropology that informs all of Rika Edmondson's work. Now, and our general method in terms of analyzing it is a kind of interpretive phenomenological analysis, or Monica Ardelt is trained in objective hermeneutics, Rika's an ethnographer. So we've sort of, say, in all going over these interviews, we've basically shifted back and forth, mutually informed each other in terms of our readings of these interviews. And there's 16 extreme cases, actually, and it really should be 32 times 2 countries. So we've got 2 nations, I should say, we've got 2 ages, we've got 4 faith groups, we've got 2 nations. So this is all still in progress. I'm actually going to look at just 4 Christian cases, the 2 highest, oldest, the oldest, so Koreans and Canadians who scored the highest and lowest on the 3DWS. So really I'm zooming in on, say, really just these 4, but we're going to extend this to like the others as well. So if you do that, you find, so who's the, the Canadian high 3WS participant? Their exemplar is a former principal and an old friend. Asked why they're exemplary. You say, well, she walks the talk. I've watched her grow over the years. Her 2 daughters emulate her. She's lived a religious life, and she says, if we think of religious as a form of guidance, respect for something far beyond what we can comprehend here, that would be her. And then she gives examples of rallying friends to go work in a soup kitchen, and then without a cookbook, just taking whatever donations come, making something, say that made use of everything they had. Active participant in the Catholic Church, raised their children as Catholic. And then but zeroing in, so what was virtuous about this example? Well, can compassion be a virtue? A lot of humanism and compassion. She's non-judgmental. And how did she become virtuous? Well, she has an Italian background. her sister, though, had an incurable sort of lifelong disease, and so an ability to give and help. It was sustained because she has an inner God that she turned to and talks to and asks for help. She says, I don't know anymore, I can't deal with it. And going to church has helped. So have her friends and community helped her. In the larger picture of the church, she's an active member, so she's been involved with different groups with that, and that certainly must have contributed. And how about her cultural upbringing? So being Italian, we said, being Catholic, not being wealthy, all those things made a difference. And her spirituality. I'd say she accepts her limitations and believes that there's a way of going beyond them. Maybe that's where she calls upon her religion to help out, for the situation. So we get a very rich portrait of this person. And then we also asked, has she inspired you? Definitely. Since the participant's early career, she met her early as a teacher, and she's inspired her ever since, really. And is she also wise? Well, yes, she's wise. Could you emulate her? I hope, she says, I hope. But I would need to become more outgoing. Now, let's consider, so bear this in mind. Now, if we consider what the person, say, just in general, we get something like various things that have been said about her. We've got actually nothing physical about her description, but we do get a sense of her, say, subjectively experienced as compassionate, non-judgmental, that you've watched her grow. Indicators of relationship quality. Her daughters emulate her. It says something about her. She has an inner God. Behavioral things. She walks the talk. She's lived a religious life. She rallies friends. She's active in the church. So all these things give a sort of portrait of her that we can consider. Now compare this to the lower sort of wisdom participant. So who's virtuous? It's a coworker who became her friend. And the reasons why, she was a very honest person, probably too honest. She'll say something like, I don't think that haircut looks right. Most people would say, oh, it's nice, but she'd say, I think it looks crooked. She's honest that way. And then a story about her, it's like, well, a coworker's husband died, and she went to the funeral, even though she'd only spoken to him a few times over the phone, whereas the participant just sent a card. In another story, there was a conflict at work, and this same coworker had said, well, I'll come with you. And she said, well, you don't have to do that. And she said, no. And she said, no one's actually done that for me before. So it was really a sort of, I guess, that type of loyalty she really admired. How did she become virtuous? I don't know why honesty is so important to her, other than that she had an emotionally difficult sort of early part of her life. Has the community influenced her? Well, I think the community, she was a theater person. They stick together. The cultural upbringing influence, I don't know. How about her spirituality? No, she's an atheist. Has she affected or inspired you in your life? Well, I don't really know how to answer that question. I think she's brutally honest, and I'm not really that way because I don't want to hurt people's feelings. So, and then we go on to say, now we're going to ask you some similar questions about wisdom. Would you like to continue talking about this person, or would you like to choose somebody else? And she says, wisdom. Okay, well, I'm not sure wisdom would be a word I'd use to describe her. So if we consider this case, we've got, once again, we don't have any physical descriptions, but we have someone whose experience is brutally honest, not wise, that she's a loyal friend to her and other people. Behaviors, she's attended a funeral, she stood up for her, the participant, like in a difficult situation. So if we consider these together, it's kind of what we might expect. The higher wisdom participant is more articulate than the lower one. The higher wisdom participant also admires and hopes to emulate her exemplar. She considers her wise. Whereas the lower wisdom participant, she seems to respond almost to rescind her endorsement, say, at the end, like saying that she doesn't want to hurt other people. She wouldn't want to emulate her. She doesn't consider her wise. Now, what about Korea? So if we consider the Korean example, who's morally virtuous? She starts by saying, there are many. I'm a deaconess at my church, and the other deaconesses have very proper thoughts. They have a sense of service, but their level of service is on a very different level than mine. And then that's it, actually, she never returns to the other people. She just talks about herself, basically, and what she's done, and like various other things. So typical scene, So as the director of a kindergarten, when parents would come to complain about a teacher, she'd listen to them and say, the founder of the kindergarten is me. Talk to me about what issues you have. Whatever improvements have to be made, I'll be the one to implement them. And that would make them think before they spoke and take responsibility. So you've got to take responsibility for the children, for the employees. One particularly illuminating story was that, sort of basically in the broader context, she said, I went to a director's meeting and someone asked me how my husband's doing. And I said, he's frustrated and fit to burst. So that person, who's quite old, said, My, wouldn't it be nice if you were more like your husband? I feel bad for him, living with someone like you. Now I'm old, she says, this must have happened a while ago. I understand that person better. So, my husband suffers when I suffer. Isn't that right? He's okay with everything without being able to take responsibility for it. Well, he's able to take responsibility to his level of satisfaction, but not mine. So then we see that the exemplar, it's a deaconess, but we don't really know anything more about that. The character that she presents of this older lady, we know that she's old. She's critical, but she seems to have a point. That's conceited. She's very frank, and she spoke to her, but in a way that was in rebuke. So it's an unusual example to put into this, actually, sort of in answer to this question. Now, what about the lower virtue exemplar, the lower wisdom exemplar? She also chooses a deaconess. And why was she chosen? She's such a good person, without an ounce of deceit. She's someone you can praise anywhere, anytime, without hesitation. And a story about her, she has lots of hidden service. If there's a family in a difficult circumstance, she secretly leaves them bowls of food. She's incredibly admirable. Who else would do that? She's a very rare type of person. They say she's like Tabitha from the Bible, silently helping those who say they're having a hard time. I admire those who don't make helping obvious. And how did she get to be so morally virtuous? Well, her husband was a military officer who passed away from appendicitis, leaving her with 3 small children. She got a very small stipend from the military, and then she had a makeup business, but she noticed that there were people suffering more than she was, so she prayed to God, and then afterwards she started to help them, who had nothing. And that's why she's amazing, very amazing. And so have her friends helped her. She continues with, she helps them a lot. And she helps non-believers a lot as well. And but as to Korean cultural experiences, I'm not sure if that made a difference. Has their spirituality or religion influenced her? Yes. Religion has had an influence. And has she affected you? Of course. There was someone who's having a hard time and struggling with depression. Deaconess, we would always take them to the mountains. She helped that person heal completely. But then for the question of, can you become morally virtuous like her? No, it's impossible. I don't think I can do it. When I look at myself, I often think I'm too selfish. She helps people selflessly. It's something you're born with. I can't do it as much as she does. To become like her, she does things well. She does things well. So here we have a very rich, say exemplar now. Once again, we don't know anything physical about them, but we do see her as a good person, rare, universally praiseworthy. Indicators of relationships are things like she's without an ounce of deceit. She helps even non-believers. Behavioral things, she does things at hidden service. She travels to the mountains. So if we consider these 2 cases now, we get something somewhat surprising. The higher wisdom participant seems forceful and somewhat caring, but also a little bit self-centered, it seems to me, when I read this story. Like, she never even gives us an exemplar. And at least in the eyes of the other woman that talked to her, she's not that wise with regards to her husband, at least. So the lower person gives an articulate and compelling description of an exemplar that she admires, but then she says she could never emulate her. Is she just being modest? Maybe that's some sort of cultural difference. So these interviews show that we can get equally rich exemplars from these 2 cultural settings, but we may not be equally able to interpret them in light of the 3D wisdom scale. And I guess that's something, especially in our most extreme cases. So Actually, I'm going to hold for that. We actually have a lot more of things, as you can imagine, that we could draw out of these interviews. And in fact, say, Monica Ardell, Rika Edmondson, and I got together in Babelsberg for about a week just to go over the qualitative interviews. And we only did, in that time, we did one a day, so we only got through the Christian ones. And then we said, well, we're going to have to keep this going, sort of at a longer distance. But we did have a much better grasp of the method we're going to use. But it's each of these cases ended up being about 20 pages or more. So I'm going to. So we also have a study too, which we actually haven't talked about up until now. But I'm going to hand it over to Hyeyoung, who's done more on that in Korea. Mm-hmm.
So I guess how many minutes do we have?
About 9 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah. So. So what we did was when we are doing the first study one, we ask our participant to nominate, moral exemplars who are living in a virtuous life. Anyhow, we end up not using a lot of them because it wasn't really easy to talk to them. Either they are away or they are giving exemplars in a book or history. You know what I mean. So anyhow, what we end up doing is we at least in Korean side, in Canadian side it's still in progress. What we did was we have researchers who they know about moral exemplars, and then from there we did a snowball techniques. There, some of them who we got to know as a moral exemplar, introduce other people, etc. and etc. Anyhow, so some things we found, like we have 17 moral exemplars we interviewed. Something interesting is all of them are trying to help others. Trying to help others. They're where is my? Oh, hold on a second. Oh, yeah, and there are also, where is my, okay. Anyhow, so they are really diligent in learning. They are just stuck there, but they are trying to learn from other people and learn. Getting education, lifelong education is very important for them, at least in Korean side. So that was very interesting. And they, I think that my 5 was somehow missed in any way. Anyhow, so those are the things we found. So one example, here. I'm sorry, the last, the point. They have high empathy and pro-social behavior, persistent in learning and helping, and highly reflective, and less materialistic. So they don't care about the money, money and being rich. Okay. Anyhow, the one thing interesting, I added one example here. I met him. One of my friends introduced me. He's a monk. He's actually a married monk. Somehow he was enlightened when he was very young. He was very, very mediocre as students, and he wasn't doing well in school. I mean, he was very, mediocre as students. But one day he just suddenly enlightened, and he became like excellent students because he somehow see everything, So it was very interesting, and he published a book called Buddha Speak of Disabilities, and I read it, and I thought it is really, really interesting. He can see actually people's previous lives. So I thought it's really interesting to interview him. And when I asked him to be interviewed, he was willing to spend his entire day for me. So I was there from 10 a.m. to 12 a.m. So and we are having dinner together, lunch together. I mean, you know what I mean. So it was really great that he's willing to spend his day for me. Anyhow, so one thing I posted here, that example I posted here, he's helping a lot of time. Actually, I published. It's coming, right? It's coming. I published a book about him. Not book. I'm sorry. I'm so like, when I have a limited time, I get, overly anxious. Anyhow, so I published an article about him and how he helped, other people. So that is coming. That is coming. Oh, okay, thank you. I have 5 minutes. So the things he does is he helped out a lot of people with disabilities, and not only people with disability, people with a problem in general. So when I read a book and when I talk to him, people suddenly who got injured, or got suddenly disabled, or people who have disabled children who have to deal with their life, entire life to take care of their children, are suffering from, like, karma. Basically, they keep asking themselves, hey, what made me live like this? What made me have what kind of karma do I have? Especially among Korean, what karma do I have that I have built in my previous life to make me miserable like this in this life, right? And they're constantly asking those kind of questions, and they make them actually stagnated rather than moving forward, and being depressed, right? So one thing he does is he, try to help out these people. So he was not actually like go out and seek people who need help. People come to him because he was he was known to some people, and then other people introduce other people keep spreading words. Hey, you can go to him and help out, get some help. Anyway, one thing, there's so many great things what he said, but I thought the quote really summed up well, so that's why I put this one here. In Buddhism, there is no competition or comparison with others. It is the best preservation in the present Korean culture because it emphasizes how much mentally mature and how well you control the desire and obsession with the material than your genetic makeup. And in Buddhism, even more miserable persons should be respected and regarded to have a great possibilities. Thus, it will contribute absolutely to achieve equality. So a lot of times, people with disabilities are not really gaining, basically discriminated in society and etc. So that's another thing which add on to their miserable life. So that he is saying that, okay, everybody in Buddhism, everybody should be equal, and even the most unfortunate ones. So that's why I added here. And there's so many things we could talk about. But this is just tentative conclusion and maybe future exploration. Actually, we have a more coming later too. So anyway, culture and age and education matters in endorsing virtues, and value orientation and wisdom, predict values, and but self-independence does not really predict endorsement. And in addition, we could go more, Michel talked about the qualitative analysis. We could actually go to grounded theory, do some ground theory using this qualitative analysis, and really try to see some bigger picture how people are motivated to live a virtuous life. And then we can develop a model from it, and we can test the model using any kind of quantitative measurement and etc. And also we are still thinking about the philosophical ethnography. We are doing it right now, and so doing more deep analysis about discussing certain words or certain sentences. So we can do more deep analysis on that too. Do you have anything else to wanna add?
You're right. The point I added at the end also, but the exemplars that I think, actually just speaking with Linda the other day, this whole question of sort of what, can we get some sort of explanation for why these people are exemplary, even in the minds of the participants, as opposed to simply a description that would pick them out of a crowd. And I think that's an interesting thing to consider when we look at the way that people are describing these. But I guess if you go on to the next slide, say in Toronto, where we actually do have some other students that are, like Jin-Sung is doing his master's thesis using these data. So he's looking at this question of virtue versus wisdom exemplars and finding quite different accounts of how they develop. So I guess I won't go into all of that, but I just want to say that. And of course, then to thank
Yep, it's
everyone.
out of time. So these are the people we got help. There's so many, and I just didn't have enough space to put everybody. But yeah, thank you everybody, and we also learned a lot from you guys too. So it's been great, and thank you for all of you helping us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I had a question. I think much of what you presented just raises a lot of interesting questions, the notion of wisdom, virtue, and how these two may diverge in certain cultural contexts, and what you do theoretically with that. That would be interesting. I want to ask just specifically about the one quote from the Buddhist exemplar that you spent the day with. And he says, thank you. He says the most miserable person, by which I take not like the guy ranting at the neighborhood kids, right? Oh, you nasty kids, but like a very low status person. Is that what that means?
I mean, I guess what he meant by is he meant by is a most less privileged person. I
yes,
guess.
The least privileged. Okay, thank you. What does respect and regard mean in this context? Did you talk with him about, because this seems to me to be connected with both wisdom and virtue, this insight about respect and regard. It seems to be it seems to be at the heart of your work. Did you talk about that in this context? I don't know if you've had a chance to go over this interview or not.
Basically, like, it is connected to the book he published, Buddhist talk, the Buddha speak of disabilities. So people who are in that book, described in that books are, suffering from, discriminations and socially, what? I can't talk to them.
Socially marginalized.
Yeah, socially marginalized. Thank you so much. Socially marginalized and cannot get a job and etc. So we basically, what he meant by is we have to respect and take care for everybody equally, right? Equally. That's what he meant by that. But is that what you are asking?
Does that translate into egalitarianism? Does that translate into egalitarianism, and what is equal? What needs to be equal? Is it the worth of the person? Is it their perspective? There's a lot there that should really concern us as we're trying to make sense of these terms, virtue and wisdom. It seems to me, and this is a really rich content.
Yeah, I guess it's not necessarily egalitarianism. It's more like respected as a person, as a human, right? So it's more human right issue than anything else.
Thanks. So one question I had, given the interviews you described in some detail, relates to this idea in a lot of contemporary virtue theory that virtues are acquired dispositions. And it seems like, at least for many of the people you're interviewing, they're innate. So, what makes this person virtuous? Well, she's Italian. In this one, you've got someone talking about genetics. And I think in 3 out of the 4 of the interviews you described, people say things like, well, they're just born this way, or I could never do that. It's not something you can acquire. It's just the way you are. Of course, maybe people are wrong about this. That's a separate story. But it's very interesting to me that contemporary philosophical accounts of virtue almost all treat it as the sort of thing that doesn't count unless you acquire it. And yet your participants have almost exactly the opposite view. I'm curious what you make of that.
So what you see here is that actually people sort of think of virtue as something that can develop. Likewise with wisdom, but it's going to be developed in different ways. And so, for example, by pro-social engagement, by imitating a virtuous person, persistent effort, faith, but at the same time they acknowledge that there's some aspect of it, some part of it that's going to be inborn. And in that sense, it's like if someone were to say to me, who do you admire intellectually? Einstein. Could you be like Einstein? No, I'm going to rule it out. I could study. I could really be like, in that sense, I could be inspired by him and emulate him to a certain degree. But I don't expect that I would ever be able to match that. And I think that's the sense in which people. And then if you say why not, because I think there is something either unique about his upbringing or about his genetics that would make it, that made him a sort of unique person. So I think that's the sense in which people are taking it. It's not as though they have no room for sort of virtuous practice, but it's just they acknowledge that there's some other part that really is, like was said here about the genetic lottery, things like that that are also integral to their understanding of what it means to be exemplary.
Thanks. That's really interesting. So it fits especially well with the picture you get out of Mencius of this, like sprouts of virtue that are innate, but then develop more or less well depending on things like social and material circumstances. So it's not that it's either acquired or not, but rather that there's this innate thing that can be in which there are individual differences, perhaps. Which then develops in a social and material context. So that might be an interesting thing to explore.
So that's epigenetics, right? Will?
I really love the interviews you're doing about the morally exceptional individuals, and I want to contrast the ones that you talked about with the ones that Peggy was talking about this morning. So, when we ask people to nominate, we've asked people a lot to nominate morally exceptional people, and we tend to get the kind of person that the Canadians mentioned, sort of kind of everyday people that are maybe a little sweeter or warmer, maybe a little more gentle than other people, but they don't really jump out at you as strikingly morally exceptional. And then you've got the people who are, spending a year worth of weekends getting 300,000 signatures to, get the water clean. And it seems to me like those are different categories. And I was wondering if you could talk about that.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I think you're right in the sense that people draw from their own experience. And that's what I thought was interesting for me, is putting people who are high and low in wisdom. Because I do think that the person who is higher in wisdom was getting something closer to the sort of cases that Peggy was talking about, in the sense that it's somebody who's, spending a lot of time, working with the church, working with different groups, working with, so she's very engaged, and in that sense is really, I don't know if she did 300,000 signatures, but she's done a lot of extra things, as opposed to the person who was like lower in wisdom, who really seemed to pick somebody exactly like was maybe just a little bit nicer even than her, because it didn't seem, you might say, well, going to a funeral is actually not such an exceptional thing. Likewise, sort of being friendly to somebody and saying, I'm standing with you, is, like for some other people, that's their everyday life is like that. But in her case, it was really somebody who's more of exemplary. So I guess maybe the point we're trying to show is that, who the people's own sort of life worlds, say, are a benchmark against which you judge these cases. So.
I don't think we had that. Okay, as Michel said, we looking at the people who are more like daily. We can find someone around us rather than for people who are highly socially engaged or active social activists. We're not really looking at that, but people who can find around us, right? So one interesting thing is we actually yesterday when I was talking, our session, social networking session, so I talked to, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Dan, and so anyway, what we talked about was they talked about this like LGBT issues and etc. So one of our moral exemplar who are helping other people, who is Christian, who are helping other people, and he's tremendously empathetic and doing a lot of good things. But when it comes to and when we ask a question, okay, do you have any other moral example, any other moral exemplar who you admire in other religion, not just in church? He said, no, I don't even need to look at, the Bible said everything. Why should I look at other religion? So, and then he talked about, Bible said the gay homosexuality is not bad, is not good. So, you know what I mean? So that's I think very, very common in our society. Yeah, one person can be very empathetic, empathic, and help other people, and very great person, and they're not harming anybody, right? They're not harming anybody, and they're actually doing good for other people. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong, but in some ways they're not open-minded, right? So I guess that's what we get in our daily life.
It's also maybe one last thing to say on that is that study 2 is looking for people who are nominated by these people as really exceptional, and then of those people, we actually weeded out the ones who really seem to be doing something that is documentably exceptional, like they're doing Habitat for Humanity, or they're an international speaker on Muslim rights, or so, and we're going to interview those people, and I think that then we might get closer to these really exceptional exemplary cases.
All right, let's thank our speakers.
Thank you.